highly experimental, so we'll see how that goes. I really hope that I've inspired you guys, given you a few ideas, especially if you're working with a small space. I really want to show you guys that you can do more than you think you can with your space. Hi, I'm Rachel, and welcome back to Auxhart Gardening. Today I'm talking about all the ways that I'm planning to maximize my small garden space for 2021. Some of these ideas I'm repeating from last year, and some of these are brand new ideas, and I really hope that all of you out there with small gardens will be inspired to make even more of the little space that you have. So when I'm planning my garden for the year, I keep in mind both the spring and the summer garden, because a lot of the times these things are going to overlap for me if I'm going to be the most productive that I can be. So I have to very strategically place things that will take longer in areas that I maybe won't need until later. So for example, this year I am going to put my peppers and tomatoes in the same large area of my biggest raised bed. And those can't really go anywhere else comfortably, right? So I have to make sure that my garlic, which is going to take until midsummer to mature, doesn't go in a bed where I'm going to need the space for my peppers and tomatoes. So things like this, as I'm going through planning, I'm just making sure that the spaces that I'm using are going to be available for the time that I need them. So you can see the plan for the spring garden here. At the top, you can see my larger raised bed here. So it's got this little divider in it that came with it, and this part at the end is 4x4, and so the bigger part is about 4x12. And so in the smaller part, I have already planted actually, my garlic and some of my started onions. And you can see I've got here the estimated maturity days for these. So onions will be done a little sooner than the garlic, probably. But the main idea here is that the onions and garlic are going to be taking until after I want to plant out tomatoes and peppers to mature. That's why they are segregated over here into the smaller portion of the bed. In the larger portion, I have a plan to have carrots around the edges, mostly because they're very, very thin plant. So I can have them right there along the edge of the bed and have them not really get in the way of me planting out my baby transplants. And so the carrots will mature before the transplants of tomatoes and peppers really start expanding their roots and needing those resources. So those carrots along the edges, and then I have scattered turnips and radishes for seed stock. So last year I had a few turnips and radishes that I let go to seed, and I'm pretty sure that because those brassicas were there intermixed with my pepper and tomato seedlings, that I had a lot less pest pressure than I would have otherwise. And I do need more seeds, so I do need a place for these things to go to seed, and it will take until about midsummer for most of these seeds to be mature. So I'm going to scatter turnips and radishes in the spring, and I'm going to be able to harvest mostly radishes, maybe a few turnips, and then anything that's not yet ready when I'm starting to transplant out will likely be able to stay put intermixed for seed stock. Down below I have my second 4x4 raised bed that's a little ways off near the trellis. And so in this bed I kind of have a permanent sage in the corner. It takes up more and more space every year until I cut it back, but it's basically got a quarter of the bed over there. And in this bed right now I have some carrots that will probably come out right before spring planting. And so right about now I'm starting indoors some kale and spinach and a few more onions to put into this bed. And so these are brassicas, the kale and the spinach are at least, that will really stand up to the cold weather coming into the spring. And so these can get started now and go out and start making some really tasty leaves. And then the onions down here are a bit more of an experiment. So last year I had quite a bit of trouble getting large bulbed onions. And so what I'm trying, so the onions up in the top over there, I planted those in the fall. I started them in seed trays and then transplanted them out into that half of the bed. And the onions that are going to go on the other side here, those I have just started last week. And so those will go out maybe at the end of January, beginning of February. And I'm going to compare how the two do, because some places will recommend that you overwinter your onions that you've started from seed. But I just want to try giving them a little less time in the cold and see what happens. All right, so flipping over to the summer plan now, you can see I have the same layout, but instead of the onions and garlic in that area, I'm gonna do bush beans. Now I'm doing bush beans there because bush beans are pretty fast to grow, and I'm probably going to want to succession sow them or do 2 big rounds. So I found that beans in my area grow better in the beginning of the summer and the end of the summer. And in the middle of the summer, they really suffer because it's very hot and humid here. So bush beans are really a beginning and the end of the season type thing. So I'm gonna try some right after the garlic comes out, and I'll probably try a second round later in the summer there. Now, again, in this big section, that's where my tomatoes and sweet peppers will be, with basil as a companion plant. And I'm also trying eggplant this year, so a small section of that bed will be eggplant. And something new that I'm planning on trying this year is first summer pole beans. So if you were following my channel last year, you saw that for each of my tomatoes, I gave them basically just a single pole to climb up and tied them off to that pole. And so I had this idea to plant some pole beans right before I put in my tomato seedlings. And since pole beans will grow pretty quickly and the tomatoes will take a little bit to really get started and start getting big, I'm wondering if I can get a crop of pole beans off of those posts before the tomatoes really need that space. It's highly experimental, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm just trying to get more production from my garden. And if all goes well, those beans will fix nitrogen down in the soil that once they die off in the heat of summer, the tomatoes will be able to utilize to really get kind of a second growth spurt from that nitrogen. And so again, in the smaller bed, the sage will still be there. And the rest of that area I'm going to dedicate to trying to grow my super orange pumpkin. And I don't know what really the variety it is. This is the pumpkin that grew randomly out of my compost pile a couple years ago, and I've been trying to regrow ever since. It was very orange, so I've dubbed it the super orange pumpkin. And it was really great, so I'm just trying to get more of that. And I struggled a lot last year with my pumpkin. I planted it in a similar place to where it grew out of the compost pile, but A, it was a very shady spot, and B, there was a huge amount of squash bug pressure. And so this year, I'm putting it in this back bed to get a little more sun, and I'm also going to be paying way closer attention to squash bugs so that I can really stay on top of them and get rid of them before they become as big of a problem as they did. And additionally, with the summer plan that isn't in the spring plan is the use of container space. So last year I did all of my hot peppers and herbs in containers, and I'm just going to continue with that this year because that seemed to work out really well. Going to be trying a few new varieties that I'll go over here in a minute. But basically that section of the garden is going to be the same. A little different on that is that I'm going to try and utilize some of the bed space that I have in the front of my apartment that we don't normally talk about because until recently it was very overgrown with some random vining plants and some bulbs that the previous owners had put in. And the only thing that I had put out there is the one rosemary bush, which is doing surprisingly well given that I don't care for it basically at all. And so I'm going to try and put some extra or more ornamental types of peppers out there in that front bed. So that's really the only change from last year in terms of the hot pepper container type situation. Alright, so I also just wanted to touch on some of the varieties that I'm going to be putting into the summer garden. And first of all, let me mention, this came in the mail for me for Christmas from an anonymous viewer of the channel, because I had previously been storing all of my seeds in a cardboard box. So thank you if that was you. And this is actually a really great solution. I think this is originally for storing photos. And so it's a big box full of more plastic boxes, which are incidentally the perfect size for storing seed packets. And so I've just separated mine out into different categories. I have my flowers, herbs, sweet peppers, hot peppers, bush beans, pole beans, that sort of thing. So just gonna go over some of the major varieties that I'm putting in the garden that I'm super excited about. Alright, so in terms of sweet peppers, I'm going to be growing a sweet banana pepper. These are seeds that I saved from the garden that started it all, basically. Back when I first started cleaning out the raised beds in the back, the smaller one is directly behind my apartment unit, and then the bigger one is a little further down. And so I just started with the small bed, and my neighbors were inspired to clean out the larger bed that was more behind their unit and start planting in there. And they had this sweet banana pepper plant back there that was so massively productive. And by the end of that summer, they were, struggling with some stuff, and I was taking care of their garden for them, and decided to save some of the seeds from that sweet banana pepper plant. So I'm going to be trying to germinate these and get some more banana peppers this year. Additionally, I'm going to be growing this Edgevarsky pepper. This pepper actually is the one sweet pepper that is currently overwintering in my bedroom. It is so thick-walled. I'm so excited to have more of these this year. It's such a good, sweet red pepper. The other one that is just a really good thick-walled sweet pepper is the Lesa pepper. It's especially pretty because it is that kind of heart shape. And again, it's got that really thick wall and it's very sweet. So it feels like a really productive pepper for cooking. And then this new variety, Etuda, it's an orange bell pepper. It says it's a very, very sweet pepper. Sugary sweet, blocky, thick-walled. Really looking forward to that as well. Now, I maybe have the most variety of hot peppers, and you might think that I am somebody who really likes spicy food. And I would say sort of, I don't know why I get so excited about these hot peppers. I do a lot of drying of them and making my own spices, and I'm currently in the middle of making my own Tabasco sauce. So I do kind of like spicy things. I'm not like a spicy nut or anything like that. But I'm basically just really trying to try a lot of things and figure out what I really want to focus on when I have more space for hot peppers. So only a couple of plants of each of these. I'm going to try out the Big Jim. A lot of hot peppers are very small. And so you have to grow a lot of them to get a lot of fruit. So I'm hoping that the Big Jim will take up less space and give me more pepper. I'm going to be regrowing the Anaheim. This is a very mild pepper. And by the end of the season, I was stuffing it with cheese and breading it and frying it, kind of like a pepper mozzarella stick. It was so good. I'm growing serrano peppers because this is the pepper that my salsa recipe calls for, and that's always turned out wonderfully. Growing jalapenos. This year I pickled a lot of jalapenos, and those go in my spicy burrito recipe. I'm growing cayenne. This year I made my own dried cayenne powder, and again, that's turning out really well. Let's see. I'm gonna grow Tabasco. Probably gonna grow more of this one, so I can have a bigger batch of sauce. I'm gonna grow the Buena Mulata again. It's just such a pretty pepper, and it's so versatile. It can go in salsas in a pinch, or be the hot chili in a curry. It's really, really good, beautiful, versatile pepper. One of the ornamentals going in the front is this one. It's a really beautiful variegated variety I haven't tried before, but since it's so pretty, I thought I'd put it out in the front. And then lastly, we have the Shishito Pepper. I've heard so many good things about this. It's supposed to be not too hot, and really kind of great for snacking on and probably frying up, similar to what I did with the Anaheims. So we're going to be trying that this year as well. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to talk about, though by far not the end of what I'm growing, is the tomatoes that I'm growing. So I'm only doing 2 varieties this year. I'm going to do the Amish paste again, and then I'm also going to try this variety. How do you say that? San Marzano Lungu number 2. Both of these are sauce tomatoes, and I realized that if I want to be making tomato sauces, I really need a lot of tomatoes. And a lot of the bigger tomatoes that I was growing last year are just a little too hard to process into good sauce. So I'm just going to double down on making sauces this year. And these will do fine for salsa in a pinch. But that is my goal for the year, is just to be able to make enough tomatoes to have a lot of sauce from my small space. All right, and that is the garden plan for 2021. I really hope that I've inspired you guys, given you a few ideas, especially if you're working with a small space. I really want to show you guys that you can do more than you think you can with your space. And I really hope that this pole bean tomato experiment works out. But if you're curious about how that's going to turn out, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I do weekly garden tours throughout the summer, so you'll be able to see how that turns out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I wish you all happy gardening.